I refuse to accept the Sopranos ending. And not the show ending per se, but really the actual conclusion itself. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, it seems that the discourse in recent years has shifted away from discussion of various possibilities, but rather more so a variety of analysis videos explaining how Tony was killed in the final scene. Now, I like many of the statements about foreshadowing in the season, as well as the hints in the restaurant itself, so I'm not going to say there is no validity to these ideas. In fact, a lot of them do make sense, but I don't think they are necessarily true. Why do I think that? Well, it has to do with another shift I noticed in the fandom of The Sopranos in the last few years. The Sopranos is one of my favorite shows, and its popularity definitely endures, finding new fans and undergoing a re-examination during the years following a global pandemic. The show proved to be another fixture of pop culture, bringing people together in a difficult time. Unfortunately, well, sort of unfortunately for me, but not necessarily for you, dear viewer, you'll have to let me know in the comments, I suppose. My thoughts on the true ending of The Sopranos have really aligned more with what I think the main goal of the series ultimately is, or at least seems to be, in that it's mostly a character progression / regression of the main character, Tony Soprano. You see, when I first watched the show when I was much younger, I fell in love with the series and its depth and its more realistic approach to the modern street-level mafia lifestyle. I found stories about organized crime alluring since I was probably too young to be watching or reading about such material, to be honest. It's sort of become a running joke among some of my friends that if it's about the mafia in any way, there's a good chance Joe will like it. That's true, though the examination of this might make for a good exploration in another video. Yes, I like the more superficial notes such as the violence, language, and other things, but like most pieces of fiction that I truly enjoy, it's usually all about the characters. Tony Soprano was a character that I gravitated to, and he seems to be everyone's favorite character, including mine. So much so that if you'd start a discussion about your favorite characters on The Sopranos, it's usually like, okay, besides Tony, obviously. He is a character with so much complexity, and was portrayed so well by James Gandolfini, and yet, it wasn't until my third or fourth time watching the show that I fully realized the trajectory of this character. It was something new I kind of discovered, which I think is one of the aspects of any great piece of art. You can experience it a number of times and discover new things upon each new viewing. Around this time, I watched a few videos that pointed something out to me that I honestly never thought about that much. This is kind of odd to me since I had watched and discussed the show a number of times, so maybe I just didn't want to accept it on some level? It seems that, well, Tony Soprano is a bad person. Now, obviously, in the context of general morality, we all know that he's not exactly a good person, but that's not really the point. As the main character of the most influential crime drama show ever, his complexity shows how dynamic a human being is, even within the confines of the traditional role of the gangster, usually a bad guy in most stories. It might seem like I'm stating the obvious, but nothing was ever done to this extent in the medium. It's been touched upon in other films and the like before, but not to the length and, well, simple quality of a show that allowed for the audience to truly like Tony despite all his faults. He's not a bad guy, considering. At least in the early seasons. You see, Tony just gets worse. For all his attempts to better himself in some ways, he gives into his mob world and succumbs to his worst attributes. He doesn't change, well, at least not for the better. The biggest indicator for this is Melfi, who kind of symbolizes hope for Tony, and finally gives up on him. So she loses hope for him, and so do we. I mean, the show gives up on him. Maybe the writers did too. Perhaps that was always intended, but I didn't really like this idea. However, well, I don't really like this concept, but I've come to accept it. While I think The While I think The Sopranos is very well written, The Simpsons too, I haven't liked the way I've seen Tony since then. Simply put, it makes me sad. So what do I think the true ending is? Considering this thematic trend, I don't think Tony was killed. You know that final look we see as he looks up before the fade to black? It really seems like it's framed as if he's seeing not just Meadows' arrival, but he's looking at the audience, us, one last time, with kind of a confused and dumbfounded countenance even. It's like the gaze is conveying, "Oh, you're still here? Don't you get it? Forget about it." Sorry. No, I think the story would continue further. Maybe Tony would be killed, but more likely I think he would continue to alienate himself further, both personally and professionally. It would just seem to fit the tone of the series' final seasons, and be much worse than him just simply getting killed off or even redeeming himself and leaving a life of crime, which kind of seems unbelievable. I mean, can you even really picture that? Those dream episodes may have seemed extra strange for a reason. I mean, if Tony isn't a mobster, is he even really the same person? It's interesting how much others define us by our environment or profession, or to what extent we use those things to define ourselves. Then again, perhaps ambiguity and the discussion on various perspectives like this is the true ending. It's kind of meant to be that way. I have a feeling that was David Chase's original point anyway, considering he had that original goal in mind and pretty much still refuses to give a definitive answer. So the ending is the discussion, the ambiguity. It's pretty abstract, but I think it's kind of fitting. After all, that's the ending we have. What's your take?